In the heart of Alabama, behind the walls of Julia Tutwiler Prison, 5 women await their fate on death row, each convicted of heinous crimes that shook communities and left families shattered. Their stories are complex, layered with tragedy, violence, and questions of justice. In this video, we dive into the lives, crimes, and consequences of these women, exploring the events that led them here. This is a story of loss, accountability, and the weight of the death penalty. Before we begin, please hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you don't miss any part of this. Patricia Blackmon, now 54 years old, has been on Alabama's death row since August 7. She was convicted for the brutal murder of her 2-year-old adopted daughter, Dominica Bryant, in a case that horrified the small city of Dothan, Alabama. It was a warm spring evening in Dothan, Alabama. On May, Patricia Blackmon, then 29, was living in a mobile home with her partner and their adopted daughter, Dominica, whom they'd welcomed into their home just 9 months earlier. Dominica, a lively 2-year-old, was the light of the household, or so it seemed. But beneath the surface, tensions were brewing. Court records suggest Patricia struggled with the demands of parenting, and neighbors later reported hearing arguments from the trailer. That night, something snapped. According to prosecutors, Patricia's frustration boiled over into unimaginable violence. Around 9 p.m., inside the cramped mobile home, Patricia allegedly began attacking Dominica. The toddler was alone with her adoptive mother, defenseless. Court documents describe a chilling sequence. Patricia struck Dominica repeatedly, using her hands and possibly a broken pool cue. The blows were relentless, targeting the child's head, chest, and limbs. Dominica's small body couldn't withstand the assault. She suffered a hematoma on her forehead, fractured ribs, and internal injuries, so severe that she stopped breathing. At 9:30 p.m., Patricia dialed 911, her voice frantic, claiming Dominica had stopped breathing. Paramedics arrived to a grim scene. They found the 2-year-old in the master bedroom, lying on the floor in a diaper, her tiny body covered in vomit and blood-soaked socks. Paramedic Eddie Smith later testified that Dominica had visible bruises, a hematoma on her forehead, and blood on her chest. Despite their efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene. After the 911 call, Patricia remained at the scene, reportedly distraught, but offering little explanation. She claimed Dominica had fallen or been injured accidentally, but the evidence told a different story. Police searched the trailer and found blood on multiple items: a broken pool cue, a child's t-shirt, a bed sheet, a quilt, and 2 napkins. The sheer volume of blood and the extent of Dominica's injuries pointed to a deliberate act of violence. Patricia was arrested that same night, charged with capital murder. Patricia's trial began in 2000. The prosecution presented damning forensic evidence: the blood-stained items and an autopsy report confirming Dominica died from blunt force trauma. The jury, horrified by the brutality against a defenseless child, convicted Patricia of capital murder. By a vote of 10-2, Patricia's appeals have been denied, with courts citing the overwhelming evidence of her guilt. Since her sentencing, Patricia has lived in isolation at Julia Tutwiler Prison. Death row inmates face strict confinement, often spending 23 hours a day in their cell. Little is known about Patricia's daily life, but reports suggest she's maintained a low profile, with no public statements or high-profile appeals in recent years. The Alabama Department of Corrections does not release detailed information about inmates' routines, but conditions at Tutwiler have been criticized for overcrowding and inadequate mental health care. Patricia Blackmon's background is sparsely documented. She had no prior convictions for violent crimes, but prosecutors argued she struggled with parenting stress. No mental health diagnoses were presented at trial, though her defense team suggested emotional strain may have contributed to her action. Details about her early life or relationship with Dominica before the adoption remain scarce. The murder of Dominica Bryant sent shockwaves through the community mourned the loss of a child described as bright and joyful. and local child welfare agencies faced scrutiny over the adoption process. No major legal controversies have emerged in Patricia's case, but advocacy groups have pointed to her case as part of broader discussions about mental health support for parents and the death penalty's application in cases involving domestic violence. Next, a mother's unthinkable act against her infant son. Case 2. Tierra Capri Gobble. Tierra Capri Gobble, now 40 years old, has been on death row since January 6, 2002. The crime, committed in Dothan, Alabama, revealed a disturbing pattern of abuse that culminated in a tragedy no one saw coming. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know how close or far you are to where these heinous crimes took place. On December 15, 2004, Tierra Gobble, then 21, was a single mother living in a modest apartment in Dothan. Her 4-month-old son, Phoenix, was her only child, born in August 2004. Court records paint a picture of a young woman overwhelmed by motherhood, with little support. Neighbors later testified that Tiarra seemed distant, often complaining about Phoenix's crying. That morning, Phoenix was fussy, as babies often are, but what unfolded next was far from ordinary. According to prosecutors, Tiarra's frustration reached a breaking point. In a fit of rage, she allegedly shook Phoenix violently, slamming his tiny body against a hard surface, possibly a crib or table. The force was catastrophic, fracturing his skull. Court documents detail additional injuries: bruises on his face, neck and chest, fractured ribs, wrists and arm, and a tear inside his mouth, consistent with a bottle being forcibly shoved in. The motive, prosecutors argued, was Tiarra's inability to cope with Phoenix's needs, though no clear intent to kill was established. Around midday, Tiarra rushed Phoenix to the Southeast Alabama Medical Center, claiming he'd stopped breathing. Hospital staff fought to resuscitate the infant, but he had no pulse and was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. An autopsy confirmed the cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head, with a fractured skull and extensive internal injury. Tiarra remained at the hospital, visibly shaken but offering inconsistent explanations. She suggested Phoenix might have fallen or choked, but the severity of his injuries raised immediate suspicion. Police searched her apartment, finding no obvious signs of a struggle, but noting the cramped, chaotic living conditions. Tiarra was arrested within days, charged with capital murder after the autopsy results confirmed the extent of the abuse. Tiarra's trial began in late. The prosecution relied heavily on the autopsy report, which detailed Phoenix's catastrophic injuries, and expert testimony confirming the injuries were intentional. No eyewitnesses saw the act, but the physical evidence was overwhelming. The jury convicted Tiarra of capital murder, and by a 10-2 vote, recommended the death penalty. On January 6, 2006, the circuit court followed the recommendation, sentencing her to death. Like Patricia Blackmon, Tiarra resides at Julia Tutwiler Prison, confined to a small cell for most of the day. Death row conditions are harsh, with limited human contact and minimal recreational opportunity. Tiarra has reportedly been a quiet inmate, with no public statements or media interviews. Her appeals have focused on procedural issues, but none have succeeded in overturning her sentence. Tierra Gobble was 21 at the time of the crime, with no prior criminal record. Court records suggest she faced significant stress as a young single mother, with limited resources. No mental health diagnoses were presented at trial, though her defense argued she was overwhelmed and lacked support. Details about her upbringing or personal life remain limited, as her case has received little media attention. The tragedy sparked local discussions about child welfare and support for struggling parents. Advocacy groups have cited Tiarra's case in debates about the death penalty for young mothers, questioning whether mental health or social services could have prevented the tragedy. No claims of innocence have been raised, and Tiarra's case remains relatively low profile. Case 3. Christie Michelle Scott. Christie Michelle Scott, now 45 years old, has been on Alabama's death row since August. She was convicted of the capital murder of her 6-year-old son, Mason Scott, in a fire that prosecutors say was deliberately set to collect insurance money. This case, set in the small town of Russellville, Alabama, shocked a close-knit community and raised questions about motive and maternal instinct. It was the early morning of August 6. Christie Scott, then 31, was a stay-at-home mother, living with her two sons, 6-year-old Mason and 4-year-old Noah, while her husband, Jeremy Scott, an executive at CB&S Bank, was away on business. Mason, who had mild autism, required extra care, and court records suggest Christie often disciplined him harshly, showing less patience with him than with Noah. The family had faced financial strain, and Christie had a history of involvement in fires, 2 in 2006, one deemed arson but uncharged. The day before, on August 15, 2008, Christie had taken a chilling step. She applied for a $100,000 life insurance policy on Mason, adding to the existing $75,000 in policies she and Jeremy held on both boys. That night, she fed Mason his dinner, then gave him an extra-large dose of cough syrup, double the recommended amount for a child his age. After tucking him into his bedroom, she ensured Noah was safely in her own bed. Then, prosecutors say, Christie began her plan. Around 2000, Christie allegedly poured a flammable substance, likely gasoline or lighter fluid, around Mason's bed. She struck a match, and flames erupted, quickly engulfing the room. The fire spread rapidly, with smoke billowing through the house. Christie grabbed Noah, her cell phone in her pocket, and fled to a neighbor's home, leaving Mason behind. At 2:31 a.m., neighbor Jennifer Davidson was awakened by Christie's screams. She opened her door to find Christie fully clothed, holding Noah. Davidson called 911 at 2:33, but it wasn't until 2:35 a.m., 2.5 minutes later, that Christie mentioned Mason was still inside. Firefighters arrived within 10 minutes, but the blaze was too intense. They could only enter a few feet before being driven back by heat and smoke. At 4th hour, Franklin County Coroner Elsie Malone found Mason's remains in the charred bedroom, his body ravaged by thermal burns and smoke inhalation. Dr. Emily Ward, a pathologist, later confirmed Mason died from the fire's effect. Christie initially claimed the fire was an accident, possibly caused by a faulty television cord, but investigators were skeptical. An accelerant-sniffing dog detected flammable substances near Mason's bed, and Fire Marshal Ed Polk determined the blaze originated. A key piece of evidence emerged. The smoke detector in Mason's room was found on the floor, forcibly removed before the fire, with no heat damage, unlike other wall-mounted items that melted. Christie's behavior raised red flags. Hours after the fire, she and Jeremy visited a hair salon, where witnesses said they joked and never mentioned Mason. At his funeral, Christie reportedly said to a relative, "Noah's always wanted a baby sister. Maybe he can get one now." 3 days later, on August 19, 2008, Christie was questioned at the Russellville Fire Department. Her inconsistent answers and the mounting evidence led to her arrest on August 26. The insurance policies, the removed smoke detector, and her history of fires painted a damning picture. Christie's trial began in June. The prosecution presented over 70 witnesses, including fire investigators, neighbors, and insurance agents. They highlighted the $705,000 in life insurance policies, the removed smoke detector, and Christie's lack of grief. The defense argued the fire could have been accidental, but the evidence was overwhelming. On July 8, 2009, the jury convicted Christie of 3 counts of capital murder: murder for pecuniary gain, murder during arson, and murder of a child under 4. They recommended life without parole by a 7-5 vote, but Judge Terry Dempsey overruled them, citing the crime's heinous nature and Mason's terrifying death. On August 12, 2009, Christie was sentenced to death. At Julia Tutwiler Prison, Christie lives in near constant isolation, typical of death row. She's had limited contact with the outside world, and her appeals have focused on the judge's override of the jury's recommendation, a practice later banned in Alabama. In 2014, the Alabama Supreme Court upheld her conviction, though a dissenting opinion questioned the admission of evidence about the 2000. Christie has made no public statements, but at her sentencing, she tearfully told the judge, "If you sentence me to death, it's okay because I'll be with my son." Christie, a mother of 2, had no prior criminal convictions but was linked to 2 fires in 2006, one accidental, one deemed arson, but uncharged. Court records suggest she favored Noah over Mason,
whose autism frustrated her. Witnesses testified she was harsh with Mason in public, once pushing him at school on the morning of the fire. Her motive, prosecutors argued, was financial gain, though her defense claimed stress and family dynamics played a role. Mason's death devastated Russellville, a town unaccustomed to such crimes. The case sparked debates about Alabama's judicial override system, with critics arguing the jury's life sentence should have stood. Christie's family pleaded for leniency, but the judge prioritized the crime's severity. The case also raised questions about insurance fraud and child welfare, as Mason's autism made him vulnerable. Next, a stepmother's chilling role in the deaths of two young siblings.
Case 4. Heather Leavell-Keaton. Heather Leavell-Keaton, now 35 years old, has been on death row since August 21, 2015, 10 years. She was convicted of the murder of her 3-year-old stepson, Chase DeBlaze, and reckless manslaughter in the death of his 4-year-old sister, Natalie DeBlaze. This case, one of Alabama's most notorious, involved prolonged abuse and a chilling cover-up that left Mobile County reeling. In 2008, Heather Leavell-Keaton, then 22, was a college student at Spring Hill College in Mobile when she began dating John DeBlaze, a divorced father of 2 4-year-old Natalie and 3-year-old Chase. By 2009, Heather took a leave of absence from school to live with John, who had custody of his children. The couple moved into the Peach Place Inn, but tensions arose. John's mother noticed Heather's harsh discipline, and friends reported her calling the children spawn of Satan and demon spawns from hell, expressing fear they'd be jealous of her unborn child with John. By early 2010, the family was evicted from the Peach Place Inn, where the manager described Natalie and Chase as pale and sickly. They moved to an apartment owned by Heather's mother, Helena, in Louisville, Alabama. The children's condition worse. Court records describe a pattern of horrific abuse. In March 2010, Heather and John allegedly began targeting Natalie. Heather claimed Natalie's breath smelled like death, and that she vomited black stuff. Instead of seeking medical help, they locked her in a closet for 6 to 8 hours. When Natalie was found unresponsive, they didn't call for help. Instead, they drove her body to a wooded area in Alabama and disposed of it. 3 months later, in June 2010, Chase suffered a similar fate. According to court documents, Heather and John duct taped his hands to his legs, taped a broom handle to his back, stuffed a sock in his mouth, and secured it with more tape. They forced him to stand in a corner all night while they slept. The next day, Chase was unresponsive. Prosecutors alleged Heather poisoned both children with antifreeze, weakening them while John strangled them. Chase's body was dumped in a wooded area in Mississippi. Stacy Turner, a medical examiner, later testified that both children died from a combination of poisoning, dehydration, starvation, and asphyxiation. For months, Heather and John lied about the children's whereabouts, claiming they were with relatives in Las Vegas. In November 2010, Helena overheard a conversation between the couple that raised alarms. When confronted, Heather admitted both children were dead. Helena and her fiancé contacted police for a welfare check, believing Heather was being coerced by John. On December 3, 2010, John led police to the burial sites. Natalie's partial skeletal remains were found on December 11, 9 months after her death, and Chase's on December 8, 6 months after his. Heather was arrested in Louisville, Kentucky and extradited to Alabama, charged with child abuse and capital murder. She claimed John threatened to kill her if she reported the crimes. Heather's trial began and prosecutors presented forensic evidence, including the children's remains and traces of antifreeze, alongside testimony about the couple's abuse. Heather's defense argued she acted under John's coercion, but her lack of remorse, noted by a jail acquaintance, undermined her claim. In 2015, she was convicted of murder in Chase's death and manslaughter in Natalie's. The jury recommended death, but a judicial error failing to let Heather speak before sentencing led to a new hearing in 2021 where she was again sentenced to death. The Supreme Court rejected her appeal in John DeBlaze was also convicted and sentenced to death in a separate trial. Heather resides in a small cell at Julia Tutwiler Prison, isolated like other death row inmates. Her appeals have focused on procedural issues, like her inability to present good behavior evidence from She's made no public statements, and her case remains a stark example of Alabama's strict sentencing. Heather, a former college student, had no prior criminal record. Her relationship with John DeBlaze, a controlling figure, shaped her actions. Though prosecutors argued she willingly participated in the abuse, no mental health diagnoses were presented at trial, but her defense highlighted her youth and John's influence. The murders of Natalie and Chase horrified Mobile County, marking Heather as the first woman sentenced to death there. The case fueled debates about child protection and the death penalty's fairness, especially given Heather's coercion claim. Community members held vigils for the children, whose tragic deaths exposed failures in social services. Case 5, Lisa Lene Graham. Lisa Lene Graham, now 57 years old, has been on Alabama's death row since February 20. She was convicted of capital murder for orchestrating the contract killing of her 20-year-old daughter, Stephanie Shea Graham, in a case that stunned the small town of Phoenix City, Alabama. Unlike the other women on Alabama's death row, Lisa's crime wasn't driven by direct violence, but by a calculated plan to eliminate her own child. On July 5, 2007, in Phoenix City, Alabama, Lisa Graham, then 40, was a married mother of 2, living with her high school sweetheart Kevin Graham, and their children Shay and Kevin Jr. The Grahams ran a successful construction business, and to outsiders, they seemed like a tight-knit family. But beneath the surface, Lisa's relationship with her daughter, Shay, was fractured. Shay, a vibrant 20-year-old aspiring accountant, had been struggling. She'd dropped out of college, was using cocaine, working as a stripper, and had recently been arrested for aggravated assault in a drive-by shooting in Columbus, Georgia. Lisa and Kevin had posted a $100,000 bond to secure her release, but Lisa feared Shay would flee, leaving them liable for the bond. Court records reveal Lisa's growing resentment. She told neighbors and friends that Shay was ruining her life, calling her the little bitch and saying, "If I could kill her myself and get away with it, I would." As early as 2004, Lisa had approached Kenneth Walton, a longtime family friend and former employee of their construction business, about killing Shay. Walton, who'd served time for drug distribution, initially brushed off her request. But in 2007, with Shay's court date looming, Lisa's persistence intensified. A few weeks before the murder, she offered a neighbor, Stephen Hemmelberger, $5,000 to kill Shay. He refused, thinking she was joking, until she reiterated, "I want the little bitch dead." On July 5, 2007, Lisa met Walton at the Columbus Public Library. She handed him the keys to her truck, where he retrieved a 9mm pistol from the console. That evening, Walton contacted Shay, offering to help her find a car to flee her legal trouble. Shay, trusting Walton as a family friend, met him at a racetrack gas station on Victory Drive in Columbus. Witnesses, including Shay's best friend Amy, saw her climb into Walton's pickup truck around 9. Walton drove south on Alabama Highway 65 toward Eufaula, engaging Shay in casual conversation to keep her at ease. At the end of Highway 65 near Bowden Road in Russell County, Walton pulled over, claiming they needed to relieve themselves. Shay stepped out and crouched beside the open passenger door to urinate. Walton, still in the driver's seat, pulled out Lisa's 9mm pistol and fired 2 shots into Shay's head, shattering her right eye and orb. As she collapsed, he exited the truck, walked around to her side and shot her 4 more times in the chest. In a final act of callousness, he ran over her right arm as he drove away, leaving her partially nude body on the dirt road. When asked in court how he felt about betraying Shay, Walton chillingly replied, "I felt normal." Around midnight on July 6, 2007, truck driver Ehrlich Dinkins spotted Shay's body on Bowden Road and called. Russell County Sheriff's deputies arrived, finding Shay with 6 gunshot wounds, 2 to the head, 4 to the chest. Witnesses who saw Shay leave the gas station with Walton led police to him. Walton quickly confessed, detailing Lisa's role and admitting he'd returned the 9mm pistol to her. Lisa, however, tried to cover her tracks. She gave the gun to an elderly neighbor she called Papa to clean, claiming it was routine maintenance. When police questioned her, she denied knowing the gun's whereabouts, allowing a futile search of her home. Her husband, Kevin, unaware of her involvement, told police Papa might have it. The gun was recovered, and forensic tests confirmed it was the murder weapon, with Shay's blood and tissue on it. Walton's confession and the neighbor's testimony about Lisa's $5,000 offer sealed her fate. She was arrested in August 2007,
charged with capital murder for hire. Lisa's first trial in 2012 ended in a mistrial due to Judge George Green's failing health. Her defense argued double jeopardy barred a retrial, but appeals were denied by the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals in 2000. Prosecutors presented Walton's testimony, the neighbor's account and forensic evidence linking the 9mm pistol to the crime. Witnesses including Rachel Cunningham testified that Lisa frequently spoke of wanting Shay dead. On March 5, 2015, the jury convicted Lisa of capital murder after a psychological evaluation confirmed she understood her actions despite an IQ of 77, PTSD and schizophrenia medication. The jury recommended death by an 11-1. On November 18, 2015, Judge Jacob Walker III sentenced her to death, stating, "This was a woman who opportuned, cajoled, threatened another individual over months to murder her biological child." Her appeals were upheld since February 26, 2016. Lisa has been confined at Julia Tutwiler Prison, spending most of her days in isolation. Her appeals focusing on double jeopardy and judicial errors have been exhausted at the state level, though federal appeals remain possible. She's had no public statements, and her low IQ and mental health diagnoses have fueled debates about her culpability, though courts have ruled her competent. Lisa, born in 1967, was a high school sweetheart to Kevin Graham and a mother of two. She had no prior criminal record, but her resentment toward Shay's lifestyle, drug use, stripping and legal troubles grew over years. Psychological evaluations noted her low IQ, PTSD and borderline personality disorder, but no mental health defense succeeded at trial. Her motive, prosecutors argued, was financial, to avoid losing the $100,000 bond, and personal, driven by disdain for Shay's choices. Shay's murder shocked Phoenix City, where the Grahams were well known. The case gained national attention, featured on Oxygen's Snapped, and some questioned whether Kevin Graham's 2019 guilty plea to child sexual abuse of a minor under 12 suggested deeper family dysfunction, though no evidence links it to Shay. The community mourned Shay, a bright young woman with dreams of joining her father's business, and her death highlighted the devastating impact of familial betrayal. Lisa's case has sparked debates about the death penalty for mentally impaired defendants and the fairness of Alabama's judicial system. The stories of Patricia Blackmon, Tierra Gobble, Christie Scott, Heather Leavell-Keaton, and Lisa Graham paint a complex picture of crime, punishment and loss. These 5 women, each convicted of unthinkable acts, sit in isolation, awaiting their fates. Their cases raise profound questions about justice, mental health, and the death penalty in Alabama. What do you think? Does the death penalty serve justice in these cases, or are there deeper issues at play? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know what other true crime stories you'd like us to cover. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more.